Hello everyone, and welcome to Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting series on what if Naruto had blue eyes power and become a Pokemon Lord. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Sir, we'll need to blast our way through the tunnels blocked by rubble. Then do it. Today we have Professor Samuel Oak in our studio to talk about this recent discovery. Professor, how are you? Oh, I'm doing great, Amy, he answered, sitting down on the armchair beside hers. He wore khaki pants and a red polo under a white lab coat. His hair was a brownish gray, lighter than his tan skin. Amy was relatively young, curly purple hair, glasses, a nice curvy body. She was exactly the kind of person you'd expect to see on the TV to keep the people watching just to see her. Amy cleared her throat. Professor, I understand that you've done some research on this Pokemon Lord before. Why, yes, I have. Could you explain some of this to our viewers, please? Of course, I'd be happy to. The man said, over the years, we've found many old scrolls written in a nearly dead language that described a single being. It described the being as a humanoid creature with the power to flatten mountains or cause tsunamis with the flick of a wrist, he told her. Wait, you said humanoid, so it looks like a human? Yes, a few of those scrolls have drawings in it, and with your permission, I'd like to show them to everyone. Screams echoed all down the cavern walls. Everyone near the entrance stopped what they were doing and turned to see the men and women explorers get thrown from the shadows by huge Pokemon that were soon recognized as Onyx. Oh my god! One exclaimed, running towards the injured group, followed by others to help take them to the medics. As you can see, the creature in all the drawings look almost exactly alike, and since these were found all over the world, we find it hard to believe that these were drawn by the same people, Oak said, pointing to a collection of pictures that were on a projector. They all showed the same man-like being in the pictures. It stood on two legs and dressed in clothing from ancient times. It had fangs, claws, cat-like eyes, whiskers on each cheek, and spiky hair that covered the sides of his face and head. Behind him was multiple fury tails, and on top of his head poked out a pair of cute ears. He practically emitted a feeling of peace and harmony. Many of the females in the audience and the ones watching on the TV sighed dreamily at the handsome figure. The scrolls also had a few places in it where it described a time where the being went into a rage and change. I think the pictures. Ah, here it is. The picture changed to show the same man covered by a strange aura, practically changing him to look like a monster. His chest was bare, showing off muscles and scars, even markings that looked like tribal tattoos. Amazing, Amy said. What are his powers? Oak chuckled. Many have asked me that question over the years, and to tell the truth, I don't know the full extent to his power. One of the ancient scrolls that we translated had a few stories telling about a few of his powers, and that's all I know. But it said that he has power over fire, water, air, and earth in their raw forms. Meaning that he could make a river change directions if he wished, or pull water from the air, stop the wind from blowing, keep a fire burning without air, heat, or fuel, or raise walls of earth to block attacks. Amazing, she said again. I agree, Oak stated. I myself have searched for his tomb once. Imagine, if we were to somehow harness his power, pure water could easily be shipped to anywhere in the world for free. Instead of having to process salt water, all we'd have to do is bottle it. So you believe that he's not dead but just sleeping or something? Amy asked with a small look of confusion. No. A being of such amazing and terrifying power wouldn't fall to time. We have many other Pokemon believed to be hundreds of years old, so I find it hard to see him dying of old age, Oak said with a laugh. The search for the Pokelord's tomb has been put to a halt today, as a group of Onyx and Steelix have been discovered in the caverns. It is unknown why they are furiously protecting the cave, but many claim that they are protecting their master's final resting place. Explorer Weasley, the head of the expedition, has sent out a call for any trainers and promises to pay them to help them rid the caverns of the Pokemon. Deeper within the caverns, a large stone cathedral with a large tower in the middle sat, seemingly unaffected by time. Any who saw it would be amazed at how such an amazing structure could be underground in a huge hollow cave, and how the cavern top hadn't caved in yet. Through the front was a large open room with a single throne against the wall near the back. It was made from stone and crystal, fashioned to jut into the air in 3 spikes. The place will be described later. On the throne sat a single figure, lazily stretched back with his head upon his fist. He had on a small gray chest plate that protected mostly his heart and lungs, gray forearm protectors, and matching leg armor over a black turtleneck and cargo pants with sandals. Over his whole body was a faded black trench coat. Multiple blonde tails wrapped around him like a blanket, covering from his waist up to his chin. His face was handsome, 3 perfect whisker-like marks on both cheek. His hair was very long, reaching past his neck and stopping near his lower back, but atop his head peeked a pair of twitching ears. Suddenly a rumble reached him, and for the first time in years a silted blue eye peeked open. Naruto Uzumaki, the legendary Pokemon Lord, was awake. I really don't want to go into detail on why both Ash and Gary, plus their groups, show up along with 3 other trainers, but just go with it. Gary did it, cheered a group of girls as an Onix slammed into the ground. A young brown-haired boy smirked. Piece of cake, he sneered, tossing a Pokeball at the dazed Pokemon only for another Onix to bat it away with its tail. Everyone gasped as the Pokeball flew back and conked the boy in the forehead, never opening to capture the Pokemon it touched. The defending Onix took its fallen brethren and fled deeper into the cave. The boy groaned as he sat up holding a bump on his forehead while the cheerleaders tried to help. Ha 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 ha. Everyone turned to see a black-haired boy rolling on the ground beside a girl with orange hair wearing blue shorts and a yellow tank top holding a small Togepi and a dark-skinned boy wearing a green vest. Shut up! Gary yelled, instantly standing. At least I can beat a Onix unlike you, Ashy boy. Will you two shut up? Yelled the girl holding the Pokemon. The head explorer Wesley, a extremely wealthy-looking old man, agreed, and the large group of trainers, explorers, and researchers traveled deeper into the earth, battling any Pokemon that attacked, and so far they had fought 3 Onix, a small group of Geodude, and a Golem before reaching an opening that led to an underground lake. Wow! Misty said, looking around with starry eyes. Amazing! With all the fresh water down here, one would think that the desert above would be flourishing, gawked a researcher. Surprisingly, a single Tentacruel attacked, ensnaring almost half the group until it suddenly backed down, releasing its victims and diving deeper into the water, disappearing in a maze of tunnels. Does anyone else think that was strange? Misty asked, looking around. Brock nodded. A Tentacruel wouldn't just leave like that, he stated. Probably ran away before I could beat it, Gary intoned while his cheerleaders nodded. While Ash and Gary started arguing, Misty asked Brock to hold her bag with Togepi in and went to break up the fight. Sensing something, Togepi woke up and climbed out of its bag before happily waddling away. Minutes later, its small voice echoed to all. Misty spun around, leaving Ash and Gary holding each other in fear of her. Togepi! She cried, causing everyone to look at her, then to what she was pointing at. There sat a Ninetales with Togepi hugging onto its leg at the far end of the path. The Pokemon looked up from the little Togepi hugging its leg and growled at the group before wrapping its tails around the little Pokemon and picking it up, much to Togepi's joy. Being a hero, Ash got up, put Togepi down, he yelled, only for the Ninetales to growl louder before turning and running through a large tunnel. Stop! He yelled, rushing after the Pokemon. I need to tell you all this. In the group, there is 2 explorers, 3 researchers, Ash, Brock, Misty, Gary and his 6 cheerleaders, and 3 other trainers that aren't important enough to name. Naruto Uzumaki sat up on his throne and stretched, the bones in his back cracked and popped as he bent in ways that no human should be able to. Looking around, he snapped his fingers, causing torches to ignite, bathing the room in their soft glow. How long had he been asleep? A year, hundreds, millions? Time had no hold on him, its grasps had long since slipped. Ever since that day he took the Kyuubi and tricked it into giving him its power. Just before he enslaved it, who knew that the great Kyuubi no Kitsune was a girl? A small voice brought him from his thoughts as a Ninetales ran towards him holding another Pokemon with her tails. What do we have here? He questioned in a slow, slightly scratchy voice, due to years of disuse. He wasn't talking about the little Togepi, he was looking directly at the Ninetales. Even after all these years, your spirit still serves me. I thought you'd pass on by now, he said, looking it straight in the eyes. Your presence here gives us the strength to continue on, even in death. Even after all those years ago when you took me in and raised me as your kid, I pledged to help you any way I could. Everyone else did too, but out of all us all, only 12 remained. Naruto smiled sadly as the ghostly Ninetales set the Togepi down and faded away. Master, a group of people have infiltrated your keep. This Togepi was with them. Naruto frowned. I know about them, but you know I don't like kidnapping Pokemon and using them like that, he said, narrowing his eyes. The Ninetales reappeared beside the smiling Togepi, who said its name in surprise and fell back with a loud giggle. I know that, Master, but he waddled up to me while I was watching the group get toyed with by that overgrown squid till you called him back. Mind if I ask why? Naruto didn't speak but smiled as Togepi waddled up the 3 steps to his seat and held its tiny arms up to him, wanting to be picked up. Saying its name again and again, Naruto bent down and picked the little Pokemon up, making it chant its name in glee. They were lucky enough to find the entrance to my keep and woke me up. It would be impolite to throw them out. Besides, I've slept for how long? Since the last time you went back to sleep. Around 800 years, the Ninetales Sprit said. Naruto's eyes widened and he nearly dropped Togepi. 800 years. He repeated. Wow, I missed a lot, huh? The Sprit snorted. Master, you said that you once slept through a nuclear holocaust and you question why you slept through 800 years? Besides, all you missed was advances in technology, new breeds of Pokemon, and Pokemon trainers becoming a profession. You could easily rise back to your former glory and reclaim your title. Trainers these days are arrogant and dumb, always trying to capture us and become Pokemon masters. Naruto's sweat dropped at the speech. Okay. Well, I just woke up from 800 years of sleep and feel up to messing with my guests, he said before holding Togepi up to his face. How about you? You want to help me? He asked with a grin. Togepi chanted his name. I'll take that as a yes. Naruto laughed, unknowingly causing echoes to bounce down the tunnels, growing darker and more evil the further away they got before disappearing in a swirl of shadows. Reappearing on a ledge above the underground lake, Naruto smiled as he saw a dark-haired boy wearing blue jeans and a vest with a hat on his head, crawling out of the cold water. The small walkway above the water was old and, as he found out, weak near the edges. A girl with orange hair grabbed him by the shirt and lifted him from the water. Ash, stop messing around, she yelled, making the whole group step back. Naruto blinked and also felt like backing off but shook his head, clearing it. Those people interested him. Maybe he should skip the toying and go straight to the main event. Nah. Oi, Ninetales, they're about to reach the door, get ready to meet them. Sorry, little one, but these people have proven to be too interesting to toy with too much, he apologized before disappearing again. Explorer Weasley gaped as the group stopped at a pair of black doors with gold trim. All the researchers started taking pictures and notes of how the door looked while one of the 5 trainers walked up to the door. I bet this would be worth a lot, he said, picking at some of the gold only to have a researcher slap his hand away. These door is hundreds of years old, don't you dare mess it up, she scolded. Something this old belongs in a museum where everyone can see it. From the details and style, I'd say this was over 900 years old. 923 to be exact. Everyone jumped and looked around for the voice only to find each other and nothing else. You humans aren't the brightest in the world, up here. Looking up, they saw the very same Pokemon that took Togepi laying on a ledge above the giant door, lazily waving its tails around. Hey, you're the one that took Togepi, Ash yelled, pointing at the lounging Pokemon. Where is he? The Ninetales chuckled, a feminine laugh that made some of the males' hearts flutter. My. You certainly are a loud one, aren't you? It said, making Gary snicker. Although, I'd rather deal with your loud mouth than that stuck-up punk over there, it finished, pointing a tail at Gary. The main researcher, Tammy, the same woman who scolded the boy from before, stepped up. Who or what are you? She questioned. Ninetales chuckled again. Well, the best way to describe it would be dead. The whole group paled and took a step back until Gary scoffed. Yeah, right. There's no such thing as Pokemon ghosts haunting a place after they die. He sneered, only to gasp and scream like a girl as Ninetales instantly appeared floating by his face. Oh pooh. I didn't even get to say boo, she intoned with a laugh. Brock gaped. How can you continue living even after death? He asked while the others leaned closer to hear the answer. Let me answer your question with one of my own. Has any of your Pokemon been acting strange lately, maybe refusing to come out of their ball or fighting reluctantly? Ninetales asked. Ash took out a Pokeball and looked at it. Yeah, Pikachu went into his ball just as soon as we stepped in. He hates being in that. That's because of Master's aura. Most Pokemon don't like fighting against a Dominate, and he is the very essence of Dominate, Ninetales said with a grin. His very presence fills yous all with power to use and allows us to live on. You mean the Poke Lord? Researcher Tammy asked, only to blink as the ghost faded away. Loud creaks and slides echoed from the door, making the whole group look at the large work of art just as it slowly opened to show the most amazing building any had ever seen. It looked like a cathedral seen in old large cities. Made of pure white marble, it was at least 2 stories above them with a long flight of stairs, and judging from the size of the building, it was at least 3 stories high. Large basins ignited, bathing the steps in a soft red glow. Okay, now that was freaky, Brock said, only to be ignored by the whole group. Tammy motioned for her assistant to come over. When he did, she reached into his backpack and pulled a small metal case out. Inside was an old tattered scroll which she opened with the utmost care, as if it would fall to pieces with a strong breeze. What's that? Ash asked, trying to look over the taller woman's shoulder and failing. Tammy me led at the chance to explain something and showed him the inside. You see this mark? She asked, making him nod. It was a faded spiral with strange marking branching off at different spots. Yeah, it looks like a pollywog's stomach, he said, making the woman slowly nod. Well, I guess you could say that, but no, this mark is said to be the legendary Pokelord's. Look up at the door, it's on there too. I believe that his tomb is in there. He. Wesley laughed, ha ha ha. Finally, after years of searching, the ultimate power is within my grasp, he said with a crazed smirk. I'll finally be able to catch the greatest Pokemon ever. Wesley, what are you talking about? The Pokelord died years ago. Fool, Wesley sneered, walking up the steps with his assistant behind him. Do you really believe that the Pokemon with the power to control all others would just die? I've searched for years to find this place and finally done it. With his power at my command, the world will be mine to control with my soon-to-be army of Pokemon. Ever the hero, Ash was about to try and stop the crazed explorer, only to find that the man's assistant came armed with a pistol. Ha ha ha, you won't stop me. This is my destiny, but I'll need you all to battle him so I can capture him. I'm not sure if a Master Ball will be enough for him, Wesley said, before going up the steps with his assistant, forcing them to follow. Naruto frowned as he had heard the whole thing from his seat. Togepi was peacefully sleeping in his arms, snoring lightly from his egg-like shell. He hated people who used others for their own gain. They always harmed others and usually ended up killing many people. Made him glad that he had forsaken his humanity long ago. Although he really couldn't talk about killing people, around 10,000 years ago, he had been called the bane of humanity when he awoke to a nuclear wasteland and decided to be evil for a while, killing hundreds of the surviving people and looting towns. But hey, that's a story for another time. Naruto snorted. He knew he had a few mental problems, probably due to the large doses of radiation and other ungodly amounts of chemicals he had played with, or maybe he was slightly insane from living so long. He shrugged, not even looking, as the large double doors to his throne room swung open and in strolled an elderly man, followed by a less than happy group of researchers and trainers being held at gunpoint. That's weird, only one room, he heard the old man say. He had gray, nearly white hair and wore what looked like a safari suit. Naruto stayed still as if he was sleeping, with the Togepi curled up on his lap, snoring contentedly. Watching with narrowed eyes, he watched as the humans finally noticed him. Finally. I can't believe it, my dream's coming true, the man said before turning to the group. I thank you for getting me this far. I thought that he would be awake so you'd have to fight him, but I see now that's not the case. You see, over the years I've come across an object that will force the so-called Pokelord to grovel at my feet and pledge its loyalty to me to get it back. Naruto was tempted to kill the man then and there, but felt curiosity to find out what the man possessed. After all, he had lost many things over the years and wouldn't mind getting some of them back. Wesley pulled a small bundle from his pocket and untied the string around it before pulling a thump-sized green crystal that practically screamed, valuable. Besides, he's no normal Pokemon. Don't you see just how human he looks? Most of the legends only tell of his power, but only one tells how what he truly is. And what, pray tell, did a book say I am? Naruto spoke, cutting him off and staring at him with his ice-cold gaze. Wesley and the rest of the adventurers were speechless as the Pokelord seemingly woke up and questioned them. The small egg in his lap shook and opened up to reveal the yawning Togepi, who chanted its name. Misty saw her Togepi sitting in the Mon's lap with a happy look on its face and almost cried thinking that he had abandoned her. Naruto noticed this and stood up, keeping the Togepi in his grasp, and seemingly glided down the steps. "Is this your Togepi?" he asked the orange-haired girl who nodded. Togepi turned and saw Misty standing just a few yards away and seemed to feel her sadness as he started to reach out to her. Naruto stopped at the bottom step and held the Pokemon out to her as she quickly made her way over and took him in her grasp. Now, he started turning his hard gaze to the old man. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," Naruto growled, cracking his neck. "Sure, you can have it back. Just as soon as you pledge your undying loyalty to me, Hanyu." "I think that's right," Wesley smirked. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "You dare call me a half-demon?" he asked before grinning. "Ha ha ha, oh that's rich." He faded away and reappeared next to the elderly man with his arm around his neck. "I'm greater than a demon, you see. I'm not bound by my word. I could say that I promise to let you live then kill you once I'm done," he said, plucking the crystal from the wrinkled hand. Shoving the old man to the ground 10 feet away, Naruto held the crystal up to the fire's light. "Ah, how long has it been since I've lost this? Had you just returned it, you'd have been greatly rewarded. After all, this is worth enough to buy 3 mountains, he said, making everyone gape at the statement. "But to me I'd pay enough to buy 10 as a reward," he finished, making some of the unimportant trainers have money signs replace their eyes. Suddenly Naruto leaned back so that his back was parallel with the ground as a gold and white ball flew over him. Craning his neck, he saw the elderly man standing while holding a red and white Pokeball. "I've come too far to be beaten now," Wesley screamed, throwing the Pokeball. "Go Scyther." The Pokeball opened in the air and released the mantis-like Pokemon with a wild beam of light. Wesley growled and pointed at the blonde. "Attack." The large green insect-like Pokemon seemed to hesitate. "Come hatchling, show me what you got," Naruto spoke, holding out a hand and making a "bring it" gesture. In a flash the Scyther was on him, trying and failing to slice him to pieces while he leaned out of the way or sidestepped altogether. "Wow. Amazing. So cool," the trainers murmured, watching the spectacle. The researchers stared with gaping mouths while Tammy pulled out a camera and taped the one-sided fight. Naruto stepped aside and pushed the Pokemon's bladed arm off course with a finger. "Hatchling, are you holding back?" he intoned before pushing it back, knocking it off balance. "Your stance isn't strong enough. You need to be prepared to move and regain your bearing if an enemy gets too close." "No way," Brock stated with a slack jaw, making them look at him. Misty asked, "What's wrong?" while keeping a firm grip of the excited Togepi. "He's lecturing the Scyther during a battle and talking to it like it was a child." "You forget, human. Compared to Master, most Pokemon are hatchlings, pups, or kits," the Spirit of the Ninetales stated, reappearing by his feet and lazily watching as her master corrected the Scyther's stances and swipes. The sound of ripping fabric reached their ears and they all looked to see a happy-looking Naruto studying a large gash in his chest while the Scyther looked about ready to faint. "Ha ha ha, pretty good hatchling," he laughed. "Try this on for size." Naruto threw his head back and took a deep breath until his cheeks bulged, making him look like an angry child before snapping his head back down and sending a jet of water rocketing toward the surprised Pokemon. Unable to dodge, it was hit head-on and sent rolling back into his elderly trainer, who hit the ground with a pained cry. "I forgot that you humans aren't as strong as us," Naruto spoke with a bored tone. "You aren't used to pain like we are, especially one as old and frail as you." Naruto blurred out of sight and appeared right next to the old explorer, sitting with his legs and arms crossed while looking down at the man. "You know, I hadn't come to capture and enslave me, you would have gotten off a lot easier, but seeing as it is in your nature to be greedy, I'll give you 2 things. He said before smirking and holding up his hand, which grew claws instead of fingernails. "Your life and this nice set of scars." The screams of the old man echoed and caused the onlooking trainers and researchers to tremble as the blonde straddled his prey and carved 4 long gashes across his face before standing up and leaving the wailing man on the ground, holding his bloody face. Then he turned towards the assistant, who leveled his pistol at him. "Don't come any closer," the man demanded, pulling the hammer back. Naruto took a step forward. "Or what, human?" The gun went off and Naruto's whole body seemed to slide out of the way without moving, allowing the bullet to hit the stone wall beside him. "You missed," Naruto droned boredly with a smirk. "My turn." He sped forward again and hit the younger man in the chest with the open palm thrust, sending him flying out of his throne room and tumbling down the steps where he landed in a heap with swirls in his eyes. Pathetic, he droned. Naruto finally looked to the trainers and researchers who stiffened as his eyes studied them. You all are free to leave, he said dismissively, snapping his fingers and making a powerful gust of wind appear from nowhere, pushing them back. No wait, Tammy yelled, frantic at losing the chance to learn more about this creature. Seeing them struggle against the wind, Naruto swiped his arm towards them. Be gone, he yelled. Almost instantly, the gale doubled then tripled in power, picking up the explorers, researchers, cheerleaders, and trainers and sending them all safely down the tunnels where they were deposited in a pile surrounded by destroyed excavation equipment and research tents. They all stood up slowly. Wow, Brock said, looking at the destruction. This is obviously the work those Onyx. They must have waited until we were deep in the cave and appeared, destroying everything and scaring the others away, the nameless researcher said. Quickly, Tammy yelled, I must speak with. She stopped as she turned towards the cave entrance only to stop. There was no entrance. Half of the stone wall was gone, replaced by loose soil. No. She whispered, sinking back down to her knees after all that money spent. She was back at square one. Naruto gazed at the ghostly forms of his Pokémon sadly. Each and every one of them were like his very own children. He had raised them by hand, trained them, housebroken them. They had lived by his side for years and ultimately died by his side. My children, he spoke to the 12, for years you served me even in death. For too long your souls have lingered around. Pass on and be with your mates once more. I will miss you all. Tell those that passed already that I hope they found happiness in the place where I cannot go. Tell them that I do not hold their actions against them. Tell them that I understand and wish them well. The Pokémon hung their heads as their ghostly bodies started to float upwards and shined before flaking away. Go and be free, my children, be happy. All but one shined brightly and disappeared, leaving Naruto and the Ninetales alone in the room. In another flash, the fox turned into a ghostly woman. Kyuubi-chan. The woman smiled. Naruto-kun, the great Kyuubi no Kitsune, had died within his mind but was reborn on the outside. Naruto had sensed that and taken the kid in and raised it before allowing it some of her power back, allowing her to regain her lost memories. The others didn't know this, but the real reason she stayed by his side was because she loved him dearly and knew that they would be forever separated if she died. Then she would be devoured by the Shinigami and never be able to claw her way out of hell like before. Kyuubi-chan, you're free now. But Naruto-kun, I know, my dear, your sins bar you from the heaven and condemn you to the Shinigami's stomach. That it why. I had absolved you of your sins years ago and damned my own immortal soul for you. The ghostly woman's eyes widened with fear and shock. Koi, you know. Naruto cut her off again and reached out, as if to touch her ghostly cheek. I know, dear. But I am immortal and the chances of dying are slim for me. Besides, I think Kami can overlook the fact that you're taking my place. I don't think she likes me anyway, he told her, frowning as his hand went through her. You're wrong, Naruto-kun, Kyuubi said to him sadly, ghostly tears streaming down her face. You were just dealt a bad hand in life. Maybe. But I think it's your turn to live happily ever after in paradise. With that said, Kyuubi started to fade away much like the others had while frantically trying to grab hold of Naruto. No, not without you. There is no happy ending without you, she tried to scream but froze as the process of crossing over started. Tears poured from her eyes as her vision faded from Naruto's solemn face to a rapidly approaching light at the end of a long tunnel. Naruto stood and watched as the spirit passes over to the next life, just as he had done with many others over the many years. Goodbye, my dear. The caverns were silent, empty of all other life. Naruto sighed at the stillness of the caves and couldn't help but compare it to the emptiness he felt now that they were all gone. The blonde held out his arms and concentrated on the surrounding stone. Those researchers already knew where his home was and he refused to let them defile it, not out of selfishness but because of the fact that his friends had guarded it for years while he slept. The tunnels leading to the cavern collapsed, the sparkling pools of fresh water slowly disappeared. Naruto felt his heart ache as he destroyed a true part of history and one of his connections to his friends. He then centered on his doors. The black and gold symbols on the door broke off and flew towards him, his spiral symbol slowly spinning in the air in front of him before the rest of the large metal door turned to stone. One last wave of power exploded off of him and the stone above him started to crumble. Just as everything was buried, he, along with some of his stuff, disappeared in a whirl of green leaves, which were then crushed under a ton of rock and dirt. Researcher Tammy sighed as she and her researchers tried to find anything that they could salvage from the site. Everything had been crushed and utterly destroyed. The digging equipment were nothing but scrap. Tents were ripped and crushed along with all the computers that held all the data. Dropping a crushed hard drive, finding it impossible to get anything from it, she buried his face in her hands and groaned. Everything had been ruined by that greedy old explorer. They had finally found the legendary being known as the Pokelord, only to be thrown out because of Weasley, who had been arrested not too long ago by Officer Jenny. She had told them that the wealthy old man would be charged with holding them hostage, threatening to kill them, and attempted murder of a legendary Pokemon, which was highly illegal in nearly all areas. As such, he would be fined heavily for each crime and be sentenced to prison, which he wouldn't be able to buy himself out of since the fine for attempted murder of a legendary was in the 8 to 9-digit range. She sat down on the ground with a sigh, only to yelp as she landed on something harder than dirt. With a wince, she quickly sat up and gasped. Laying on the ground was the rag that Wesley had that strange crystal wrapped in. It was tied around something hard. Her gasp and yelp had attracted the others' attention. They all approached her as she picked it up and watched as she untied the knot. Everyone fell silent as the rag opened, revealing the symbol they had seen on the door. The Pokelord's symbol. One of the men gasped as Tammy held the relic like it was made of glass. As they all marveled at the thing in her hands, researcher Tammy looked around. There was no way this could have been taken by one of them or one of the trainers. She caught the side and gaped. There he was, looking at her coolly from his place on a large boulder. The Pokelord still wore what he had on before and sat cross-legged with his arms crossed and his tails lazily waving behind him. His deep blue eyes gazed into her own and she found herself unable to speak or even breath. He slowly nodded at her and just as she blinked, a swirl of sand engulfed him before falling to the desert floor, leaving nothing but the boulder behind, almost as if he had never been there. Naruto looked into the woman's eyes as she watched him in shock. He knew from the moment he first saw her that she was an honest and honorable woman, values that were hard to find in most people. Had it not been for that man trying to force him into submission, he would have greeted them with open arms, but greed and corrupt ruined that. But he wasn't that cold-hearted towards humans, so as a consolation he decided to give that woman one of his door seals. Nodding to her, he disappeared using the desert sand. He found himself in another vast stretch of desert with the sun glaring down at him. Damn, how far does this go on for? He questioned loudly before repeating the process of disappearing in a swirl of sand and dust, scaring a small sand shrew that had been sitting not too far away at the time. In another swirl he dusted himself off and looked around as he saw himself on the edge of a forest. "You stupid bird!" Naruto heard the yell and then a loud squawk quickly after. Walking through the trees and other foliage he came upon what he suspected was a trainer, who by the looks of it needed a personal trainer and to cut down on the snacks. At his feet is a 1-foot-tall bird which he recognized as a Pidgey. Its wing was obviously broken by the way it flapped only one and hopped around of the ground in pain. "You can't do anything, you worthless thing," the fat trainer growled while trying to kick the injured Pokemon. "Why did I get stuck with such a useless thing like you?" Naruto growled at the way he treated the Pidgey. Years ago when a human became a Pokemon trainer they bonded and became partners, friends even. Later someone developed Pokeballs to capture wild Pokemon that attacked anyone that came into its territory, but soon things escalated to the point where people would capture them to fight each other. Some old clans even used them to fight wars to avoid losing members of their family. He stalked up behind the trainer without making a sound. He could already feel anger coursing through his veins and his eyes had already turned crimson. The trainer went to kick the Pidgey, but Naruto put a stop to it by stopping the kick with his own foot, making the tubby trainer stumble. He started only for Naruto to grab him by the neck. "You think it's okay to kick a Pokemon while it's down?" he snarled while throwing the man to the ground. "Its wing is broken and you get mad at it because it can't fight?" Naruto kicked him in the side, making him cry out, "Let's see how you do with a broken arm." The Pidgey watched as the blonde stomped on its abusive trainer's arm, loud crunches and snaps making it wince each time the sandal came down. It hopped to the side, careful not to move its wing too much to get a better view. It had fractured its wing a while ago, but his trainer was too lazy to notice, calling it lazy and all sorts of other names. To tell the truth, it was glad to see the fat bastard get hurt. After a few more kicks, Naruto stomped on his face and knocked the man out. "And now, let's see how you do on your own," he growled while going through his stuff, taking anything he found that might be useful, including the guy's whole backpack before turning on the small Pokemon. "Hey there, hatchling," he said while walking over and crouching down in front of it. The Pidgey chirped its name a few times, which Naruto understood clearly. "I see. Well, don't worry, hatchling, he will never hurt you again," he said, shocking the Pidgey, who had never known a human that could understand a Pokemon's language. "Hold on, let me fix that wing." Naruto slowly took the damaged wing in his hand, which then glowed a soft green color. A second passed and the pain in its wing disappeared. The Pidgey pulled its wing away and chirped a few times before moving its wing around, then flapping to get airborne. Naruto watched the young Pidgey fly around the clearing, swooping around in trees and under branches with grace and speed before returning to him and chirping at him happily, ruffling its feathers and hopping around in joy. "Who am I?" Naruto repeated as the Pidgey chirped at him. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto, better known as the Pokelord." The Pidgey stopped hopping around and looked at him in awe, making him laugh lightly as it said for him to prove it. Naruto took a few steps back and closed his eyes, which had returned to their normal color after breaking the guy's arm. He opened them to reveal a pair of crimson eyes, then arched his back as he was covered in a red haze of pure power. Pidgey hopped back as the blonde was covered in a shroud of red energy that started getting larger. Soon a roar ripped through the forest, scaring away any nearby Pokemon, and the Pidgey stared in awe at the creature before it. It was a large crimson fox with 9 tails, a bit large than a horse. This was Naruto's second form, a Crimson Ninetails. In this form, Naruto was a lot more powerful, but he really didn't use it. His fur was soft, but he could make them harden and turn to spikes as a defense against being bound by anything. He could also use his tails to attack, unlike when he was in his normal form, using them to pick up things or smack anything that got close. In the air above a mountain, a pink cat-like Pokemon with large feet, big blue eyes, small pointed ears and a long skinny tail stopped flying around and started looking around when it felt the strange power. But before it could lock onto the signature, it rapidly faded away like it had never been there. It rubbed its head with its tiny hands in confusion. "Mew. Sir, we've picked up a large energy spike. Sensors indicate that it came from the region of Ore." "I'll alert Mr. Giovanni." Naruto in his animal form started to shrink, his tails merging until only one was left and he was only a foot tall. He looked like a red Eevee. He laughed at the Pidgey's odd look, then closed his eyes before his whole body started to glow red again and returned to his human form. The Pidgey bowed to him, its beak nearly touching the ground. "Stand, hatchling, you don't need to bow," he told it with a laugh, "but what I need is directions to a town as well as a partner." The Pidgey looked shocked and couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Pokelord wanted her as his partner. Naruto smiled as the Pidgey flapped her wings and landed on his shoulder, chirping her name over and over in excitement. This just in, the search for the legendary Pokelord's tomb was brought to a screeching halt as the team was thrown out of the underground caverns by the Pokelord itself. Reports say that explorer Wesley, who funded the search, tried to capture the legendary Pokemon only to be defeated when the Pokelord awoke. After being beaten and scared for life, his assistant tried to murder the Pokemon, which is a highly illegal crime. Head researcher Tammy Price caught the battle all on tape. If you have any children watching, I must warn you, some of this is graphic. After the battle, the Pokelord banished the group from the cave and destroyed the entrance on the side of the mountain along with half of the mountain itself. Tammy Price admitted to seeing the same Pokemon not too long after that and even came to possess a piece of priceless history from it. She told us that he left it there for them to find and even nodded to her to take it when they looked at each other. Could it be that we now have another legendary Pokemon amongst us? This is Action News and we'll be bringing you more news when it surfaces. Naruto and his new partner Pidgey walked into the town and looked around. It looked extremely different from the surrounding region of ORLT around and in large trees that just radiated peacefulness and harmony with nature. He had changed his looks not long before entering the village. Pidgey had told him that she had heard about news stations doing whatever they could to find pictures and information on him even before he had truly awakened. So, with a little kitsune power, he hid his tails and whiskers, dulled his sapphire eyes and gave himself some black highlights. He also sealed his armor away. After all, not too many people walk around wearing relics like ninja armor. Why hello young'un. An elderly old man said, walking over with the aid of a cane. It's nice to see a trainer with such a close bond to his Pokemon. You know, back in my day, for a trainer to walk around with a Pokemon on his shoulder usually meant that he was a veteran, openly showing what type of Pokemon he used to give others a chance to prepare, making it a challenge for himself. Naruto cocked his head to the side. It also shows that you consider them more than just a Pokemon, shows that you trust each other and see yourself as their partner, not their trainer or master. The old man smiled and nodded, spoken like a true Pokemon master. Welcome to Agate Village. Naruto shook the man's hand when it was offered. It's a real nice place, seems very close to nature. The old man nodded. Yes, it is. It may be a bit out of the way, but you won't find a more relaxing place to stay in this region. I can see why, the blonde stated while looking at a waterfall in the distance. Say you got a place where I can get some supplies here? The elderly man nodded. Why yes, just head into town and you'll find a small Pokemart. Just look for the blue sign. I'd lead you there, but my legs and back ain't what it used to be. He sighed. I'ma just head on home. The wife'll have dinner ready soon. Good luck in your adventures, young'un. Naruto and Pidgey watched the old man hobble off, then looked at each other before shrugging. Come on Pidgey, let's go check out this Pokemart. Pidgey nodded and started preening herself as Naruto walked into the forest town. Just like the old man had told him, he saw a blue building with a sign that had a white Pokeball on it. Walking in, he looked around with raised eyebrows at the amount of stuff they had for trainers. Poke food, healing potions, burn sprays. The place had something to treat everything that may happen to your Pokemon in the wild. Inside the tubby trainer's bag was a book for trainers which had helped him with the concept of money in this time period. While there was still cash and coins, they were called Pokemon dollars, also known as Pokedollars, pocket money, prize money, or just plain poke. Trainers usually had an easier time because any money they win in battle was electronic, their Pokédex keeping track of it for them. The Pokédex he had found inside the bag was simple to use, but unless he got himself registered as a trainer he wouldn't be able to do much. So it was basically a wallet right now. He could use what little money was in it, but after that it would be useless. Can I help you, sir? A young man behind the counter asked as he walked up. Naruto nodded. Yeah, give me some food for my Pidgey and a map, he said, thinking of how much easier it would be if he actually knew where he was going. The young man nodded and pulled a folded-up map from a small box and then opened a sliding door behind him to get a bag that was decorated with random flying Pokemon. That'll be 800p, he said while Naruto offered him the Pokédex. He scanned it into the computer and nodded. Thank you, sir, have a nice day. Naruto nodded back and took the two items, stuffing the map in his trench coat and idly opening the plastic bag on his way out. Inside there were a lot of small seed-like pellets that were made of some soft, unknown substance. He took out a few of them and sat down on the bench outside the Pokemart. Here you go, girl, he said while offering them to the Pidgey, who hopped down to his leg and ate them out of his hand. Closing the bag with his free hand, Naruto shrugged the strap of the backpack off his shoulder, trying not to disturb Pidgey from her meal, and opened one of the zippers to stuff the rest of Pidgey's food inside. You know, Pidgey, if I'm going to be your trainer when I register, then you'll need to start training, he told the feeding Pokemon, who chirped her name in agreement. After you finish, we'll continue to the next town where I can hopefully find a lab where I can get signed up. In the meantime, when we set up camp, you will start training. 2 days passed since Naruto started training Pidgey. 2 days since she had been able to fly around outside of training and not be sore. Naruto was a slave driver when it came to training, and to make matters worse, when she was too tired to move and was about to faint, he would heal her up and start the process all over again. As bad as it sounded, she found herself glad that he did what he did. Every time he healed her and made her continue training, she found that the training was easier and that she could do it even longer than before. Again, he ordered while watching Pidgey flap her wings as hard as she could, sending a moderate-sized whirlwind at a tree. All right, that's enough with Gust. Now, I'll teach you a new move. The great thing about being what he was that he had the ability to use any move he wanted, meaning that he could teach his Pokemon any move he knew as long as they were strong enough to handle it. It's simple really, just fly at your target and ram into them. It's closely related to a tackle but tends to work best on other flying types, hence its name, Take Down. He snapped his fingers and a doppelganger, aka a shadow clone, appeared, a move that he was infamous for. Use this as a target, he ordered while nodding to the clone. The clone glowed and transformed into another Pidgey before taking flight. Naruto watched as Pidgey practiced the new move on the Shadow Pidgey with a smile on his face. He was going to give this trainer thing a chance, and like always, he wanted to be the best. Half an hour passed before Naruto called for her to stop. "Good work, Pidgey, we're done for today," he called while dismissing the clone. "We should be arriving in town tomorrow, so you get to rest while we're there." She chirped in relief and flew over to his shoulders, making him smirk. "Don't get used to it though, once we leave it's back to training for you." When Naruto sat down at night and looked at the map with Pidgey across from him, he told her that he was planning on going to the best person available to get signed up. The Pokemon Training for Dummies book had a lot of information in it, as well as a list of people and places that one could get signed up at, and the top-ranked person in the book was one Professor Oak of Pallet Town, a nice scalded town near the sea. Pidgey stated that he would never make it to the town, using her beak to peck at the town in a whole different region. Naruto just grinned at her and made a bet that if he couldn't make it there in 24 hours starting that morning, he would buy her anything she wanted when he got his starting money, but if he did make it, he would double her already intense training regime. Of course, she wasn't dumb enough to take that bet. No matter how far the trip would be, she would never risk having to double her training. Pallet Town is in the Kanto region, he muttered while looking at the huge map, and there are only two main routes into the town. A boat ride on Route 21 South or Route 1 connecting to Viridane City. Naruto pulled the training book from the backpack and started looking for any other information on the towns. Pallet Town had quite a few famous people grow up there, and they all loved the town despite not having many major Pokemarts and Poke Centers. They also got most of their supplies from Viridian City. Viridian City was a large city located in western Kanto. It was also called the City of Evergreen because it was surrounded by trees. It was also the home of the Viridian City Gym. Viridian City also had a Bradamy, a school for rich adults to send their kids to learn how to be trainers. Naruto wasn't bullshitting when he made that bet. Pidgey didn't know about a lot of his powers, so she had no idea that he could teleport himself in that direction. He couldn't directly teleport there because, for one, he had never been there, and secondly, it was too far for a single jump. Folding the map up and closing the book, Naruto put them both in the bag and zipped it up. "Well, Pidgey, I'ma need you to get in your ball so I can travel quickly. Besides, I don't need any trouble for having a Pokemon and being unregistered," he told her while expanding her Pokeball. Pidgey disappeared into her ball when the red beam of light hit her from the round button on the ball, and he pressed it again, making it shrink down to a manageable size. The blonde legendary placed it into his pocket and popped his neck, leaving in a swirl of green leaves. His first stop landed him in a grove of small trees. Finding it empty, he left again, just missing a small Diglett popping its head out of the ground and looking around in a confused way. Just then it heard an hiss and turned around to see an Ekans looking at it evilly before lunging at it, hissing its name as it sailed towards the small brown Pokemon. Diglett cried out its name in shock and shot back down into its hole with the purple snake right behind it. All went quiet for a minute until the sounds of a struggle echoed across the forest. Smoke and cries flew from the hole, and the Ekans quickly tried to crawl out the hole. It was covered in bruises and scraps, even had a swollen eye. But something grabbed it and started pulling it back down. The Pokemon sank its fangs into the ground and left a pair of trenches carved into the grass as he disappeared into the dark hole again. A few seconds later it shot out of the hole crying, while a family of Diglett and Dugtrio popped out of the ground, glaring at the fleeing Ekans as it slithered away, leaving a dust trail behind it. They stopped glaring and looked at each other before chanting their names in laughter. Naruto's second stop landed him on top of a sleeping Snorlax. It grumbled and latched onto him with a loud yawn, cuddling him like a teddy bear and rolling over. His yell was silenced when it rolled over on top of him, its weight crushing him. Had he been a normal human, he would have died, but he was able to teleport to safety. 5 more jumps and Naruto landed on a dirt road. Looking around for any dangers, he sighed and laughed in victory when he saw the road sign pointing towards Pallet Town. The teleporting was fun and all, but he never knew what he was about to land on or by. His 4th jump was the worst by far. He had landed right on the road in front of a large 18-wheeler, the bright lights making him freeze like a deer in the headlights. Being hit wasn't painful in the least. It had all happened too fast to even feel. But the man driving the truck sure was pissed. His truck had been totaled when Naruto didn't budge, bringing the truck from 60 miles per hour to a dead stop. Didn't help that his tails were out, and the person soon recognized him as the legendary Pokemon from the news. He could already see the headlines. Legendary Pokelord hit by truck destroyed. Shaking his head, Naruto once again changed his face back to the way he had it. When he released his tails, his disguise had faded too. Not only that, but he nearly released his bowls. Had that happened, he could imagine how the news would be. In today's news, a truck driver's 18-wheeler was totaled last night when what he claims was the Pokelord appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the road. Neither were harmed, but investigators found a pair of soiled boxers not too far from the scene. He shook his head again to rid himself of the thoughts and started walking towards the town to find a place to stay for the rest of the night. Despite being a smaller, pallet town had a small hotel for people just passing through. It was like the town, small and pleasant. There wasn't many rooms, but they were real nice, giving off the feeling of staying at home, not a cheap hotel room with tacky carpet and wallpaper. It also smelled better too. A nice lemon scent lingered the room, not the overbearing scent of mold and semen which would easily be smelled over the cleaning solution when he focused on his nose. Naruto had been to motels which weren't cleaned as much before, and he hoped never to do that again. The next morning Naruto was up and about before the sun was. He had only slept for a couple of hours, but then again he only needed a few hours to be fully alert. Walking down a street next to a large river, Naruto did an overhead toss and threw the Pokédex into the rushing water, having used the last of its funds to get that room. It definitely wasn't cheap. Now he knew why the book said that trainers would live tough lives in the beginning, seeing as they had to camp out in the wilderness until they made it big. Even then only the best of the best lived lives of luxury, winning large contests with huge prizes. Walking down the road, Naruto saw Professor Oak's lab sitting on top of a hill. It wasn't overly large as it could have been. Being one of the leading professors made Oak a wealthy man, but unlike a lot of people, he didn't flaunt it around and lived in a modest, but still roomy home connected to his lab. It didn't take long to reach, despite having to walk there. As he leisurely strolled down the road, was greeted by a few shop owners who were opening their stores. Going up the steps of the lab, Naruto knocked on the door loudly. A minute passed. Naruto knocked again. Another minute passed. Resting his knuckles on the door, Naruto started making beats of the door until he heard a voice directly behind him. "Can I help you?" Naruto stopped beating and turned his head towards the voice. "Professor Oak?" he asked the man wearing a white lab coat and carrying a large brown grocery bag. He nodded. "Yes, that's me. May I ask why you are rapping on my door?" "You wouldn't answer the door," Naruto said with a straight face. Oak chuckled and fished out his keys from his pocket. "You remind me of my grandson. Anyway, I was just picking up a few things from the store. Don't know what I'd do if they weren't open all day and night." He mused while sliding the key into the lock, then inviting the blonde in. "But what brings you here so early?" Naruto followed him inside. "Well, I wanted to get registered as a trainer." Oak nodded. "Ah, so you woke up bright and early for this? Too excited to sleep, huh?" Naruto nodded. "Yeah. Excited." Oak led him into the kitchen and put his bag down. "Well, Mr. Naruto." "Well, Naruto, you're in luck. I don't have anything planned for today, so I would be happy to give you your test and get you registered." The test was simple. Oaks took him into the lab where he set him up at a computer. He entered some information about himself, most of which was fake. After all, how could he enter Konoha as his birthplace and a birth date from hundreds of thousands of years ago? The test part was to see what he knew about Pokemon, whether or not he knew how to care for them, what their weakness was, and considering who and what he was. "Oh my!" the professor exclaimed. "I've never seen such a high score before." Naruto shrugged. "How in the world did you know about Onyx having a weak spot in the center of its back? We've only just discovered that." Naruto smirked inwardly. "I know things." Oak smiled. "Well, your scores are amazing. You could become an elite researcher or even a professor like me. If you want, you could work with me until you get the experience to be a professor." Naruto shook his head. "No thanks, I'm going to be a master, and that can't happen if I'm stuck in an office or lab." The professor nodded. "Yes, I suppose. Well, what starter Pokemon would you like? My lab offers." Naruto stopped him and pulled Pidgey's Pokeball out. "No thanks, I already have my starter," he told him with a smirk. He was already in the database, and now all that was left to Bo was get a Pokédex and have it set in trouble now for being unregistered. He tossed it up in the air. "Pidgey, go." It opened and Pidgey came out a beam of white energy, swooping around and landing on his shoulder, puffing and ruffling her feathers in pride. Professor Oak looked at him in shock. "Amazing. He gasped while looking at the bird Pokemon. You caught this Pidgey without help from a Pokemon? Naruto shook his head. Kinda. Me and Pidgey are partners, but I didn't want someone trying to catch her, so I got her to agree to traveling through town with me in a Pokeball. You tamed a wild Pidgey without any modern help? Oak questioned in shock. When a trainer caught a wild Pokemon, they normally took them to a Poke Center where they were healed. The very same machine also calmed them down so that they would think clearly. Most wild Pokemon ran off of pure instinct, and that instinct sometimes made them hostile and untrusting of humans. That machine took care of that, but in the old days, you had to work hard to earn their trust. Often it was life-threatening. Naruto shook his head. Yes, I did. It's not hard to do. Consider them your partner, not your property, and never ask them to do something you wouldn't do yourself, he shrugged. Oak nodded in agreement. Well, let's get you your dex and get it set up. Naruto and Pidgey shared a look and nodded to each other before following the professor. Professor Oak hooked up a Pokédex one of his computers and set it up, taking only a few minutes to have his information downloaded into it. After a second, the blue light in the corner flashed and Professor Oak unhooked it. Congratulations, Naruto. You are now a trainer. Naruto took the offered device and thanked him before sliding it into his pocket and leaving soon after. Well, Pidgey, Naruto started while walking down the dirt road, his face turning into a smirk. I'm officially a trainer now. Know what that means? Her eyes got wide, making his smirk widen. That's right, back to training for you. Naruto spent 2 more days training Pidgey, teaching her an attack, then having her practice on a clone. She at least got 1 attack each day and mastered them to an acceptable level. First, Naruto taught her a better attack that didn't involve physical contact like takedown. It was a normal attack that fell into the special category called Razor Wind. Then he taught her one of his personal favorites, a psychic move called Reflect, which, like the name implied, reflected an attack back at the attacker. Teaching his partner gave him this weird sense of pride. It must have been what Iruka felt when he sat through class trying his best to teach him something. At least he knew how the man had stayed sane enough to put up with them. Watching as Pidgey used Reflect to block underpowered Razor Wind from his clone, Naruto nodded at her near-perfect form. He was about to tell her to do it again, but he stopped short, catching her attention. Looking off to the side, Naruto saw a flower peeking out from a bush. Pulling out the Pokédex, he opened the front and pointed it at the hidden plant, making the light blink once before lighting up. Bellsprout, the small flower Pokemon. Easily recognized by its small size and plant-like body, along with its yellow bulb with a pint tip. All Bellsprout have an ability which researchers have named Chlorophyll, which give the Bellsprout an increase in speed when it's sunny. This Pokemon prefers hot and humid environments and is quick to capture prey in its vines. LV 6. It listed a few more things like its weakness, and a few nodded. He never really had a Bellsprout, but he did have a Weepinbell before, the Bellsprout's evolved form. Pidgey swooped over to his shoulder and scanned the trees and bushes where Naruto was looking, then saw the hiding Pokemon. She looked at Naruto for orders and asked if he wanted to catch it. Naruto nodded. Pidgey used Razor Wind on the bush, then follow up with Takedown, he muttered lowly. Pidgey nodded and took flight. She flapped her wings hard at the bunch, sending small razor-sharp bursts of wind at the innocent bush, which got torn apart by the attack. Bellsprout never saw it coming until it was too late. It cried out in surprise as the bush was murdered around it just before being hit by the Pidgey. Pidgey grabbed the Pokemon with her talons and tossed the Bellsprout out into the open, where it rolled to a stop at her trainer's feet. It sat up, the 2 leaves on each side of its body rubbing the sides of its head while muttering part of its name. Naruto looked at the Bellsprout and grabbed an extra Pokeball from his coat pocket. He pressed the button to expand it and held it over the dazed Pokemon's head and dropped it. It conked the little Pokemon on the head before flying up in the air and opening, engulfing it in a white beam of light and pulling it in. The Pokeball fell to the ground and shuddered once, the front button glowing dimly. Naruto watched and picked it up just as it stopped moving. Wow, that was surprisingly simple, he said to Pidgey while tossing it up and catching it. Good job, by the way. I think we're almost ready to start changing gym leaders. Pidgey puffed up at his praise. I think that's enough for today, he muttered. Well, walk to the next town and train Bellsprout a little before really getting into any big battles. Pidgey flew up to his shoulder and trilled in agreement. Back in the region of Ore, the legendary Pokemon Mew flew around a clearing. She had searched high and low for the origin of that power. She didn't get a good lock on it, but she was able to feel the lingering aura in the clearing. It had taken a while to find too, but now that she did, she happily fluttered around the trees, the remaining power giving her a feeling of peace and happiness. But the lingering aura was slowly dissipating. Miu's ears lowered as the feeling slowly disappeared. She had to find the creature that possessed this intoxicating aura. It was pushing her mating instincts, and whatever it was, she wanted it to be her mate. Naruto whistled while he walked down the road towards his next destination, Pewter City. As it turns out, the Viridane City gym was closed for some unknown reason. Not that it was a problem, he could always return when it opened again. It had been a couple of days since he caught his second Pokémon and then revealed himself as the Pokelord, which awed the little Pokémon. Speaking of Bellsprout, he and Pidgey were at odds over the prime real estate that was his shoulder. He would often carry one on each side and catch them leaning around his head to glare at each other. Both were very attached to him despite the small amount of time they spent together. Pidgey seemed to have a slight crush on him, while the young Bellsprout had a hero worship going on, both of which made the two want him to themselves. Speaking of which, would you two stop it? He deadpanned, coming to a dead stop. Both were standing on his shoulders, Pidgey's wings wrapped around his head along with Bellsprout's leaves, blocking his view completely while they glared at each other menacingly. Calm down or you're both going back into your Pokeballs. The blonde threatened, making them turn and sit on his shoulders like nothing had happened. Giving them both a stern look out the corner of his eyes, he continued walking towards Pewter City, enjoying the warm sunlight from the midday sun. Pidgey trilled and nudged him with her wing. Huh? He asked, looking over at her. She pointed up with her wing while talking to him. Naruto looked up in the air. What's up in the sky? He scanned the blue, nearly cloudless sky and saw a small star. What the? It's way too early to be seeing stars, he murmured to himself. It's getting bigger too. Is that screaming? Pidgey and Bellsprout looked at each other and scrambled to get off his shoulders. Naruto felt them move and looked at them both in confusion. What's wrong? He started only to yelp as something landed on top of him, sending his to the dirt path with X'd-out eyes. On top of him were a pile of 5 burnt and smoking bodies. The first 3 were Pokémon. The furs were Lee eyes limply laying over a round purple meteor-looking Pokémon with a white skull and crossbones symbol under its mouth. It moaned out its name like all Pokémon did, saying, coughing, lowly in its dazed state. Beside it laid a cat-like Pokémon with a gold piece between its ears, one of the most known Pokémon due to its name Meowth, which it would often be confused as a meow, making it a popular Pokémon with cat lovers. The last 2 were human, probably their trainers. The first was a man, who had his face in the dirt. He had long purple hair that covered his ears and wore a white uniform with a big red R on the front with black boots and gloves, as well as a black shirt that could be seen under his white top, which stopped just below the belly button. She blushed at his handsome features and quickly struggled to stand, throwing her partner and the Pokémon off of her with impressive strength. Naruto groaned and opened his eyes. Okay. That stung a little, he muttered, looking around to see what hit him. Spotting the blushing woman, Naruto got to his feet and brushed himself off, ideally checking the woman out as he did, taking in her curves and figure. It had been years since he had been with a woman, the last being his love Kyuubi, rocking the cathedral in many kinky ways, and his other Pokémon blush and vacate the area because of their lewd behavior. Rutting for hours in their human and beast forms, their moans and other vulgar sounds echoing down the corridors. He knew that even if Kyuubi was still around, she wouldn't have objected to him sleeping around, as they had often brought other girls into the relationship to have raunchy threesomes just for the hell of it. Putting on his best foxy grin, Naruto rubbed his eyes. Damn, this is a first. I've never such an angel fall from the sky before, he told her while stepping closer. The R on your shirt must stand for radiant, for I have never seen such beauty in this life. May I know the name of this gem? The girl's face turned bright red from his compliments. She almost didn't hear him ask her for her name and slowly answered, Jessie. Naruto got close to her and breathed in her scent, making her blush reach whole new levels. Such a wonderful name for such an angelic woman. I'm Naruto. Off to the side, Pidgey and Bellsprout watched in shock as Naruto put the moves of this strange woman who literally just fell from the sky, seemingly uncaring that the woman's partners were still out cold in the ground not far away. Pidgey was slightly hostile towards the other girl. While she could never really be with the Pokelord, she didn't want anything getting between them. Inside her mind she started thinking of ways to get rid of her, like using razor wind to cut off all her hair then gust to blow her away. Bellsprout, however, was still very young to a Pokemon's standards. While he wasn't old enough to really understand the concept of mating and where Pokemon eggs came from, he was happy to see the Pidgey get angry. While he was also a bit put off that he wasn't spending time with his idol and learning cool new moves, the fact that Pidgey, his arch rival, was getting annoyed and mad made up for it. Pidgey glared at Bellsprout as it laughed at her before turning to glare at the woman. In today's news, a series of startling discoveries have left scientists baffled. For regular viewers, you already know of the awakening of the legendary Pokelord, who is now somewhere in the world. But new information has been found about this Pokemon as well as another related Pokemon. With researcher Tammy's recovery of the Pokelord's seal, other researchers have found multiple books and scrolls bearing the strange symbol. The researcher and her team have started working with the esteemed Professor Oak, who spoke with us not long ago and stated that there have been multiple books found, but they had never been able to see the full seal of the Pokelord, only that it had the swirl in the center. With this discovery, they say that any trainer who visits a Poke Center or lab can ask to have their Pokédex undated with the latest information on the Pokelord. Ash and his friends walked out of the Poke Center after getting the aspiring trainer's Pokemon healed. It hadn't been long since he battled Team Rocket, once again sending them flying through the air after being hit by a thunderbolt from Pikachu. But at the same time, the little electric rodent had gotten hit by Ekans' poison sting and Ash wanted to make sure he was okay. So after Nurse Joy gave him a clean bill of health, and brushed off Brock's pledge of love like all her other sisters had, she informed them of the new information on the Pokelord and that she could update their decks. Being the enthusiast he was, Ash quickly asked her to download it onto his decks, holding it out to her in a flash. He had been interested in the mysterious legendary ever since he heard the stories from that researcher lady. After all, anything that dealt with strong Pokemon interested him, especially the legendaries. He wasn't interested in capturing and using them or anything, he only wanted to know more about the fascinating beings. He didn't even make it a few feet out of the door before he hastily opened the device, almost like a child with a new toy who wanted to play with it as soon as he could. The other two crowded the Pokédex while he scrolled towards the new entry and selected it, making the blue light turn on. The screen turned to a pair of pictures, the first being one of the humanoid pictures supplied from Professor Oak of the feral and angry Pokemon. The second was an old painting of a large bloody red fox laying on the ground in a forest with a smaller white Ninetales curled up beside him while small foxkits played around them. Name: Pokelord, the Lord of Pokemon type. Normal. Researchers aren't completely sure of this and suspect that he can change types or has them all. Element: all strong versus all weak versus unknown, evolved from unknown. Evolves to unknown. The Pokelord is one of the most known legendary Pokemon while also being the most secretive. Recent findings have revealed that the Pokelord has a beast form in the shape of a massive red fox. Texts state that he favors powerful ranged attacks by breathing out massive energy beams similar to charged attacks that highly trained plant types use. Those same texts seem to hint that he has an ability that only he can use, which is the ability to create a strange breed of Crimson Eevee, Vulpix. The researchers are unsure of what to name them or even classify them as Pokemon since they are unsure if they are real or even catchable. Naruto stared at his updated Pokédex with glassy reminiscent eyes. He had just arrived in Viridane City a few hours ago with Jessie and her unconscious partners in tow. They first stopped at a local doctor's office and dropped the man, whom he later learned was James, off to get checked out while she took their Pokemon to the Poke Center to be healed. While this was happening, Naruto got his Pokédex updated and looked at the information they had on him only to stop at the old painting of him. Any ideas of sleeping with the woman were shredded at the sight of that painting, and he bid her farewell before renting a room in the center, which they rented out to trainers whose Pokemon couldn't be quickly healed by the machine. Pidgey and Bellsprout released themselves from their respective Pokeballs and stood off to the side, watching as their master and friend quietly stared at the picture with a tear falling from his eye. He stared hard at the white Ninetales curled up beside him, her tails intertwined with his own. This wasn't just some artist rendering of what they thought he looked at. This was an actual portrait from years ago that he took with Kyubi. Those kits running around were actually her summons, or more like her children, seeing as they called her Ka-chan. The painter that he allowed to paint the picture was probably one of the only humans he ever had a real connection to. A young talented trainer, artist who once protected an abandoned Charmander from dying after Bingrainer. From what he had learned was that his trainer had told him to stay put in a clearing and not to move, that he would be back soon to get him. But as the small orange fire type sat there for hours and hours, he was suddenly attacked by a group of territorial bird-type Pokemon for being in their territory. After being beaten up, the Charmander still didn't leave and suffered for a couple days, unable to eat and nearly dying from starvation. Then a huge rainstorm came up and the Charmander curled up in a protective ball trying to keep the small flame on the tip of his tail going, because if it went out, he would die. Then a large leaf covered him and the Charmander found himself under a huge leaf from a tree, keeping nearly every drop of rain off of him. The human had came across him and out of the kindness in his heart, decided to help the poor Pokemon, which later became one of the trainer's Pokemon. Naruto had heard one of his partners telling the story and decided to thank the young man for helping the Pokemon. That was just the beginning of the trainer's raise to fame. As a reward, Naruto helped train the trainer and his Pokemon until he was ready to become a Pokemon master, which he soon did with Naruto's aid. Then, at the trainer's request, allowed him to paint a picture of him and his mate Kyubi, who also wanted some of her kits in as well. This picture brought back so many memories, good ones of his time with his lovely vixen. Naruto slowly closed the Pokédex, the cover making a soft pop as it clipped into place. Laying back, Naruto sighed and dropped the device onto the bedside table and pulled the pillow down under his head, just as he felt a weight on his chest. He looked down and saw Pidgey perched there looking at him with concern in her eyes before something curled around his arm. Naruto gave a small smile at the pair. For once they were working together on something, even if it was to try and make him feel better. Bellsprout wrapped its leaf-like arms around his arm like a child would its parent, muttering its name absently in worry. "It's nothing for you to worry about," he told them softly, using his free arm to wipe the moisture from his face, "just remembering my past." He trailed off and laid there of a minute, uncaring of the fact that they were wasting daylight. The sudden emotional strain seemed to have drained him of his energy, an amazing feat considering his vast amounts of near-infinite stamina. So slowly he fell asleep, just a few hours past midday with his two Pokemon slowly following suit. In another random clearing, an annoyed flying pink legendary Pokemon flew around angrily. Mew had been tracking the aura around for a while but it seemed to suddenly get more potent before the trail ended suddenly. She realized that the sudden stop could only mean one thing, that the owner of the aura had teleported, something that she herself could do when she needed to, usually if she had to get somewhere quickly. But she didn't use it much and opted to fly around in psychic bubble or just glide around for the fun of it. She huffed at the literal dead end and crossed her tiny arms in annoyance, her long skinny tail waving around angrily like a cat's. This was definitely a setback for her. While she was following the fading aura trail she had been flying right through it, causing her mating drive to increase little by little over time. Growling in annoyance, she floated up higher into the air before slowly flying off in the best direction she could think of to go. The next morning Pidgey and Bellsprout woke up on the pillow snuggling with each other. Pidgey looked at him and Bellsprout looked at her before they both shot away from each other, each yelling out at the other, demanding to know why the other was hugging them. Naruto chuckled from across the room with a single paper grocery bag in his arms. He had left the room for a few minutes to buy supplies and returned to see the adorable scene. Both Pokemon looked at him then sputtered out denials, using the classic, "It's not what looks like" line. Naruto ignored their denials and set the paper bag down on a cheap folding table in the corner before taking everything out and laying it out on the table. Using the starting funds from his own Pokédex, he had bought a good-sized water canteen to put on the side of his backpack in one of the elastic and mesh pouches on each side. He had also bought a few extra plastic bottles of water just in case, as well as a few potions in case he was in a situation where he needed to heal his Pokemon in public. Okay, I get it," he laughed as they continued to spout out their excuses, glaring at each other every now and then. "Calm down and eat some of this poke food I brought you so we can get going." Bellsprout and Pidgey glared at each other one last time before begrudgingly making their way to the place where Naruto had placed two separate piles of two different kinds of poke food. One of the plant type, made to keep the younger Bellsprout healthy and fit, while the other was an equally healthy brand made for bird types. Pidgey fluttered up to her side of the table where her food was and began eating. Bellsprout had a tougher time, being too short to jump up onto the table. He looked at Naruto with his beady little eyes and tugged on his pants leg. When Naruto looked down, he saw the bell sprout's lip tremble and eyes water while holding the two large leaf-like appendages up to him, wordlessly pleading for help. Naruto smiled at the bellsprout. "That's so adorable," he said while picking the Pokemon up, making Pidgey glare at it once. He looked at her with something akin to a smirk when Naruto wasn't looking. "But you just got yourself an extra training session." Bellsprout lost his adorable look and replaced it with one of horror. Naruto smirked. "Don't look at me like that. I taught you how to use Vine Whip, so you could have used that to lift or pull yourself up." Pidgey snickered, making the blonde turn to her. "What are you laughing at, Pidgey? He's your teammate, so you'll be training right beside him." Pidgey and Bellsprout gasped for breath, both inwardly cursing their lord and trainer who sat in a tree watching as they ran like the devil was chasing after them. Behind each of them was a clone, both made to look almost exactly like one of the Pokemon, only a little more shadow-like. The Shadow Pidgey had a darker shade of brown than the real one, and Shadow Bellsprout was a darker green and yellow. Not only that, but they both had sharp eyes that scared the two other Pokemon. Pidgey flapped her wings as hard as she could to escape the clone but couldn't shake it. Bellsprout ran in and out of the tree line trying to escape, tricking it one time by hiding his legs in a bush and looking up, imitating a wildflower almost perfectly, only to ruin it by laughing as the clone ran by. Naruto crossed his legs and chuckled at that. Bellsprout had some creativity, he'd give him that. He would have never expected him to think of something like that. Their training was to build up stamina and muscle. Both clones were immensely more powerful than the real Pokemon, but they wouldn't do any real damage. They knew that, but his threat of what they would have to do should they be caught was all the motivation they needed. They didn't know, but there was another way they could get out of this. He had told them that they would keep running until he said to stop, but if they worked together to take out the two clones, he would let them off early, seeing as this was technically team training and punishment. While they ran, he pulled out his Pokédex and looked at the information he had on his Pokemon. He didn't listen to the small speech it made, he only wanted to check the levels that they had. Pidgey was now at a respectable level of 16. A real improvement from the lowly level 8 she was thanks to her previous trainer. Bellsprout was now at level 7, 3 levels higher than he was before. The blonde couldn't help but be proud of the two Pokemon's improvement, but then again, their teamwork could use improvement. Another H felt his clones dispel, sending him their memories. He hummed and slid off the tree, landing on the grass with a small thud before walking over to his two Pokemon who were both passed out from exhaustion. His clones had caught them, but it wasn't their fault. They kept it up for as long as possible until they could go no more, their bodies failing without warning and sending them to the ground. Shadow Pidgey had saved the real Pidgey from a crash landing, but Bellsprout was able to continue for just a few moments after Pidgey gave out. While Pidgey was older and had much more training, Bellsprout's special ability helped him a lot. After all, being able to absorb sunlight to run faster and produce energy was a real advantage. When he grew up some more, he would be able to teach Bellsprout to harness that energy to heal himself from most injuries, even to the point where it would be second nature. Taking out their Pokeballs, he decided not to go on and heal them like he normally would, but let them enjoy their rest. He knew from personal experience that nothing was better than going to sleep when you were extremely tired. They went into their balls without a fight, not like they were in any condition to argue, and Naruto stored them away. "Good work, you two," he said while patting them in his pocket. "I believe that it's time to challenge our first gym leader." Time skip a few weeks had passed by and Naruto was now the proud owner of a Pewter City gym badge. The battle itself was pathetically easy, not even worth mentioning as the true leader was gone, traveling with some trainer who beat him. The stand-in wasn't too tough to beat. Pidgey and Bellsprout made a fool of him during the battles, but afterward, the guy didn't waste any time saying that if the real gym leader was there, he wouldn't have lasted one round. Naruto blew him off and took the badge before leaving the town with his proud Pokemon sitting on his shoulders. That was 2 weeks ago, and now other trainers were more inclined to battle him, seeing as he now had an official gym badge to prove he wasn't one of the many weak trainers who didn't take it seriously. It also made him more of a target to said trainers, who could never win a badge and wanted to prove that they weren't weak and their battle was rigged. Rattata use bite. Naruto shook his head and watched as one of said trainers ordered his Pokemon, a large purple rat with a set of large front teeth and a curled tail. It jumped towards Bellsprout with a hiss, who nimbly dodged around the larger Pokemon. This trainer was obviously dim, no wonder he couldn't win a battle seeing as he was always using bite. Bellsprout, use Vine Whip, the blonde called in a bored tone. The Rattata squeaked as the smaller plant Pokémon smacked him in the side with a vine growing from one of his leaf-like appendages, then was hit again by another from its other leaf. The Pokémon fell to the ground after a few hits to the head from Bellsprout, causing its trainer to groan and recall him. Bellsprout ran over to Naruto, leaping around and full of excitement at winning another battle. Naruto laughed and picked him up. "You did real good, I'm proud of you," he said while placing him on his shoulder and checking his Pokédex, which flashed, telling him that he had revived the normal pay for winning a battle between trainers. When trainers battled, their Pokédex automatically sensed it, and when one lost, it took an amount of their money from their account and sent it to the winner. This ensured that trainers would have at least a small amount of income to live off of. Turning and walking away from the brooding trainer, Naruto continued his travels towards his next gym battle in a town called Cerulean City. And once again, that book he had proved to be extremely useful. The Cerulean City gym was basically a water-type gym, just like Pewter was a rock-type, and like the previous gym, Naruto had no doubts that it somehow gave the gym leader some kind of advantage. After all, Pewter City Gym's battleground was a large open area with boulders in different areas, giving their rock types a slight environmental as well as the home court advantage. As such, Naruto gave serious thought to finding himself another partner, a water type to be exact. He could see why people would choose to be a one-type trainer, usually because of their environment, like living on a beach or in a forest. It really didn't give you much of a choice in what you could find and capture to train. Although, there were a few others who wanted to prove something, like to be the best whatever type trainer. But Naruto wasn't like that. He only had one thing, and that was to be the best, and as such, he would have at least one of every type so that he would be ready for any type of battle that he didn't have to fight personally. But where to find a good water type? He asked himself that question for a few good minutes, then stopped, nearly throwing Bellsprout, who had been idly swinging his feet while daydreaming, off of his shoulder with a small yelp. He looked at Bellsprout with a smirk. "How good can you swim?" Bellsprout looked at him in confusion, which only served to make the blonde smirk harder. "To the ocean?" Bellsprout questioned him nervously. "Not exactly." Naruto winced as Bellsprout screamed in fear and used Vine Whip to tie himself to the blonde's head, nearly choking him in the process. "Oh, calm down, Bellsprout. What's a little water?" he asked, looking around him in all directions. He laughed as the young Pokémon yelled at him. "I told you we were going to the ocean, didn't say anything about being on the beach," Naruto said while standing in the middle of the open sea and kicking the water with his sandal. Bellsprout chattered at him again. "Well, if you really don't want to, you can go back into U-Ball." After Bellsprout was safely stored away with Pidgey, who had been sleeping through this whole ordeal, Naruto looked around again and hummed, trying to think of a way to attract a water Pokémon. Once again an idea hit him and he suffered a quick flashback. Naruto laid in the forest by a river in his beast form, watching as Kyuubi captured each kit one by one and cleaned them like a mother would. It was an adorable sight to see, especially when she had them all in a cage made from stone and would use her tails to reach in and grab one, causing the captured kits to scream and try their best to escape their bath. He chuckled as one or two called for him to help when they were caught, then glared at him for laughing once Kyuubi released the freshly groomed kit, its hair slick from their sans cleaning. He was so amused that he never noticed one of the more playful and sneaky ones carefully dip the tip of his tail into the water, just enough so that he wouldn't notice it until Naruto's eyes widened and he jumped high into the air with a scream, sailing over Kyuubi and her kits as well as the tops of a few trees. Kyuubi saw this and giggled as she saw a large orange fish attached to her mate's tail. Naruto landed with a roll and slung the tail like a whip, sending the offending Pokémon flying through the air while it screamed, "Magikarp!" before landing in the river with a splash, wetting a few of the kits standing nearby. He never did find out which one had done that to him, but knowing how cute Kyuubi thought it was, he wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. Letting one of his tails out, Naruto stuck the tip into the water and waited. And waited. And waited. Too bad no one had told him that most of the Pokémon in the open ocean these days were a lot larger than a simple Magikarp. His eyes widened as something grabbed his tail and yanked him underwater with a curse. The light faded as he was dragged deeper into the water and seemed to be consumed in a dark, quiet abyss. He struggled slightly against something smooth as it wrapped around him tightly and squeezed. The attacking Pokémon felt its body warming up. Looking at its prey, its eyes widened as it found a pair of sharp glowing red eyes looking directly into its. The water around started to it screamed out and was thrown away by a bright red blast of energy. Naruto hissed underwater at the Pokémon and propelled himself towards it. While he needed air to live, he could hold his breath for around 5 to 10 minutes, depending if he was struggling or not, plenty of time to beat the shit out of whatever just attacked him. Grabbing its tail, he yanked it back towards him until he was able to reach its neck and strangle it. Both stubbled underwater for a few good minutes, Naruto with his arms wrapped tightly around the Pokémon and the Pokémon wrapping its body around him again, trying to constrict him again. By the time it went limp, Naruto was blue in the face and quickly swimming to the surface where he broke the water and gasped for breath. Coughing up some water, he waded the water for a minute and wiped his face with his hand. Phew, what a rush! He yelled just as a blue serpent-like body floated up beside him. Looks like I found my water Pokémon. Grabbing the unconscious Pokémon, Naruto pulled himself out of the water, using chakra to keep himself up. The Pokémon was larger than his others. While Pidgey and Bellsprout were small, this one looked like a large blue snake with small light blue wings on each side of its head. Holding it up out of the water by its tail, Naruto roughly estimated it to be around 6 feet long and pretty light considering its size and strength. He already knew how strong it was physically, as it had been able to pull him underwater when he had been standing over the water, which took quite a bit of power to do. The water under him swirled and engulfed him, teleporting him and the Pokémon back to dry land. Reappearing in a dense forest with a whirl of leaves, Naruto gently placed the Pokémon on the forest floor as it slowly came around, the strange feeling of teleporting causing it to slowly regain its senses. It raised its head and looked around before seeing him standing not too far away. Naruto looked at its large eyes and found them to be somewhat cute. It tensed up. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Naruto said lowly, his eyes flashing crimson. The Pokémon growled something and tensed up even more. "I assure you that this is no trick," he said while looking at it, "and the reason why I brought you here is simple." Naruto pulled an extra Pokeball from his soggy coat pocket. "I need a partner like you, a strong water type. I already know just how powerful you are physically." It spoke louder this time, its voice a soft angelic tone, sometimes speaking its name. "Well, Dratini, a good reason to work with me is that I can teach you more than any other trainer ever could." It muttered something, making Naruto sweat drop. "I see." He deadpanned, "Well, I'll accept your deal, but I got to ask, you don't seem too surprised that I can understand you. Why is that?" It looked at him lazily and simply stated, "Too troublesome." Naruto blinked with wide eyes. He looked into its eyes and it looked into his. "I have a perfect nickname for you. Shikamaru." Its eyes narrowed and it hissed at him harshly. "I take that back then, I didn't know you were a girl." Dratini's large eyes narrowed even more and she lunged at him in a fury, screaming at him about not knowing she was a girl. Naruto leapt back and tried to use his tail to catch her, but she got around it, forcing him to reveal the other aid to try and stop her. After a few minutes, Naruto had her wrapped up tightly in his tails while she hissed and growled at him, cursing him and trying to unleash her female rage. She suddenly stopped and looked at what was holding her. 1, 2, 9 tails. She looked at him with calculating eyes and spoke. The blonde nodded. "Correct." Dratini nodded slowly. "You took the fact that I'm the Pokelord rather well." The lazy look she gave him said it all. "Oh, yeah, too troublesome." A few days passed since Dratini joined Naruto and she proved to be nearly as lazy as his old friend Shika from his childhood. But unlike Shikamaru, she would turn into a whole different Pokemon when she got motivated, much like when Naruto called her a boy. She opted to sleep in her ball most of the time, only coming out for training, meals, or the rare battle. Pidgey got along with her easily enough, she didn't really bother her and they left each other alone. Bellsprout seemed to see her as a lazy big sister. He spent any of his free time trying to get her to play with him or trying to prank her if she didn't give in. He usually ended up getting sprayed in the face by Dratini, which sent him tumbling away from the lazy Pokemon. The first time he had seen her do that, Naruto got worried for Bellsprout's safety, but stopped when he sat up laughing and ran back up to the dragon. He shook his head as he watched Dratini send Bellsprout into a soft patch of grass, a hint of a smile on the dragon's face while the young Pokemon giggled, shaking his bulb-like head to get some of the water off. How Bellsprout found being thrown across the forest clearing by a jet of water fun he'd never know. But he had a good feeling about them. He knew that under his guidance they would be great. Sitting against a tree with Pidgey on his shoulder, Naruto hummed softly. This trainer thing wasn't bad at all. He would never understand why some people thought it was a tough life. He yawned and started drifting off to sleep, deciding to take a quick nap before continuing his travels. Instead of counting sheep, Bellsprout being thrown over a fence took its place. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next part.